So, Phill, staying within the realm of these advanced paid media strategies like programmatic, what are some metrics and KPIs that marketers would want to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, I think in addition to conversions and click-through rates and engagement rates and cost per acquisition, I think you also look at some affinity level uh, KPIs, which are um, aligned with brand lift. And brand lift is essentially looking at the affinity that a customer has for your brand, or the ability for that customer to recognize your brand or recall it, or to perceive it in a certain way. And this is pretty common across most of programmatic measuring, is that you want to see if there's any incremental lift in brand recall, which would be, assessing the effectiveness of the ads. And this is a measurement that looks at the ads that you're running and running different creatives against a test audience set, and determining which one of this set via a survey at the end of the ad, which of those ads increase the perception. So
Okay.
one of the big opportunities with programmatic is the ability to test creative and to test different variations to see what's moving the needle, and that scalability is a big reason why we would test so much within the space. So thinking about, what are the things that are going to drive the needle as far as your brand perception or brand consideration, those metrics are really what programmatic gives insight into. We can also look at KPIs that would indicate whether people are returning to your content, um, looking at those user behaviors within those platforms when people look at your ads. So are they clicking through, looking at like how long are they spending on the view through, or the view of your ad. So there's so many different things that you can do within programmatic that really kind of aligns with trying to build your brand awareness. So those are, I think, the key things to think about when you're kind of moving budget to these areas.
And I'm assuming, with regard to A/B testing and other optimization techniques, you should always be doing that, right? Whether it's testing one offer against another or just testing one creative against another for a same offer,
Yeah.
you should always be testing everything against something else, correct?
Right. And I think the simple way to do this is to have at least two ads that you're running at the same time. But you asked me earlier, what are the big opportunities, and I mentioned video, but content in general. The ability to create content today is so much easier now, and this is why, by the very default of creating content, you have things to start testing. I think, like for many clients, we are running 15 different ads for one
Oh, wow.
campaign, and we could do that because of responsive ads. Google provides an easy way for us to upload 15 different variations and allow the algorithm to figure out which test to run. You could do this for all of these platforms, and
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of no excuse to not test. I think you should always be testing, and by default, the way that we set up our accounts and the tools that are available, we are always testing. We always have multiple variations. It's an iterative process. So um, we we've kind of gone beyond A/B testing and are now doing multivariate testing, which means that you have
Mm-hmm.
different. You likely have at least three ads, but you're testing different components of each ad, and you're able to isolate what worked for this one and what didn't work for the others. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's not hard, because I think the way that content is created today and the abilities that the platform has to segment out different variations of that it makes it super easy.
So, Phill, speaking very specifically to our audience here, which um, we don't work with, nor is this podcast specifically focused on big pharma with deep pockets and multi-million dollar advertising budgets. We're talking primarily to the smaller to mid-size healthcare or biopharma organizations,
Mm-hmm.
smaller marketing budgets across the board. And in light of current economic conditions and all sorts of things affecting marketing budgets, even harder to justify any additional spend. I'm just wondering if we could get down to brass tacks a bit and give some specifics to, like, is there a sweet spot to do more advanced advertising like programmatic? Is it minimum 10 grand a month? Is it 20 grand a month? There's no one size fits all. I get that, but any insight you
Sure.
can give to the smaller advertiser there?
Yeah, I think yes, for programmatic, I would say at least $10,000 a month. If you can't get quite there, there are still options available. I think that's why working with an agency is great, because you can get a discounted rate, and pull those resources with other clients through an agency. So I think there's
Mhm.
definitely value, um, for if you have a lower piece of that budget. The lowest I've seen is 5,000, but there's aspects of performance and scalability that you have to think about. Um, but I think holistically for the health and biopharma space, um, what I've seen, and there's a recent report by HubSpot, averages of media spend for the company could be around 7 to 10% of revenue. And I think this is an average, so it could be much lower and it could be much higher.
Sure.
But I think if you wanted to benchmark, how much should I be spending on of my revenue on media or advertising? 7 to 10%. Now, if your company is essentially in a phase where they have a product and they're
Mhm.
commercializing, and say, you're coming out with a new drug, that percentage goes up. It could go up to 13 to 15% of your fiscal
Mhm.
year's budget, because you're pushing out marketing material to try to grow the awareness of that product. So these things kind of ebb and flow. But overall, of that budget, about 20 or so percent should be at least primarily digital, at least 20%. But as you
Mhm.
can imagine, most marketing is now digital. So I would say, like, we often see between 50 and 70% of that marketing budget digital. But if
Mhm.
you are still doing, billboards, or non-digital billboards, or doing newspapers,
Sure.
you want to make sure that you have at least 20% of your budget in digital. And from there, it's kind of, the, there's tremendous opportunity, as most things are becoming more and more digital.
Yep. And honestly, your agency should be helping you with this case.
Yeah,
The onus is on us to be providing our clients or prospective clients with the data, to arm them for the presentation, or even present with them to their executives the business case, the data, what they can expect from it. Um, again, I realize we don't always have the insights into the complete closed loop, but the more we can be involved, we know our clients are not experts at this particular subject matter, and that's why they turn to us. So we should be the ones helping them make the case in addition to managing it for them. Moving
exactly.
on, can you talk about some common mistakes, that you see marketers make when trying to scale up their digital advertising, and anything they can do
Sure.
to avoid those?
Yeah. So some of the challenges, it's there's industry wide, but there's also just kind of a lack of understanding. A couple of challenges, but like, I'll look at them. The first one is essentially ad fraud. That is much better than it used to be. But when you're thinking about scale, whether you're getting your ads in front of a human versus a robot is very much still a consideration. So there's a ton of vendors and partners that solve this problem, but it is still an ongoing effort to make sure that you're ahead of that and make sure that you're, reducing the amount of ad fraud in your campaigns. I think the other challenge sometimes is the scale of premium content. So your ability to access that premium content could be harder. So there's a lot of bad content available on programmatic, as you can imagine, and that sliver of very premium content um, still can be pricey. So I think is very important to understand what that mix and balance is, and a lot of clients unknowingly could go into publishers that are not driving any value because the data isn't accurate that they're sharing, or the data indicates a certain persona profile that's not true. So this is why data partners are really important to validate that data and make sure that it's accurate, and make sure that you're reaching these people that are the ones that you want to reach. I think the other challenge is, again, although it's a benefit, high segmentation and fragmentation of the market. It's a great benefit, but it's also a challenge because I can imagine sifting through the right partners, understanding which partners are working for you and not is an evolving challenge. So that is a consideration, and I think measuring attribution for marketers is I guess a ongoing struggle ever since I've been in the industry, and I know even before. So I think understanding how to measure things properly and how to figure out why things are not going the way you planned them. Maybe your measurement framework wasn't accurate, or maybe you didn't account for certain aspects of, potentially it could be the fee structure that you didn't account for some of the bidding that you're doing, and that could douse performance a bit. So there's a number of things that you need to look out for, and as I rattle those off, I understand why people are apprehensive about programmatic, because there's so many different challenges that you'll have to kind of work through in order to make it work for you. But like, I ultimately think with these challenges, the benefits definitely outweigh them as far as getting that scale and finding those audiences. And I think the biggest thing that we haven't talked about, but I kind of want to just say in general, is like, your paid media campaigns, not only is the goal and hope for them to drive ROI, but really you want that campaign or whatever you're spending your media dollars to do is to educate and to be a test kitchen, if you will, of ideas for your brand, ideas for how to target consumers. You want to learn from those campaigns. And I think that's really the biggest value that, paid media can provide. That's why I like testing into, we're always saying test, because we don't know for sure what's going to work, but like having an understanding of the test framework, having a set of best practices, those are key starting points, and your brand is unique as well as your customers. So having those as guideposts are critical. But with programmatic, it's the same way. Just like, you wanted to expand into Google 15 years ago, and want to expand into programmatic today, it's still the same process. It's learning the landscape, it's learning the tool set, the things to look for, and things to, be on the lookout for.
Yeah. And ultimately, the recurring theme through everything is it's always about good data. And that's what digital allows for, as compared to 20 plus years ago, before any of this stuff existed. I mean, yeah, you had data on, let's say, whether it was a print ad and how many responses you got, or a direct mailing and how many responses you got. Of course, you could track that data, but the granular and immediate level of data that you can have today with digital advertising is like nothing ever before. And that's the big advantage of it. In order to make those improvements and be conducting those tests and make immediate changes based on the results of those tests, where everything doesn't take 3, 6, 12, 18 months to make changes and see results. You can be doing this stuff practically in real time.
Yeah.
You mentioned content a few minutes ago as part of your answer, and let's talk about that a little bit. What is the role of content in digital advertising? What kinds of content have you found to be most effective in this particular sector of healthcare and biopharma, particularly in regard to these more advanced advertising strategies?
Sure. Um, yeah, I think content is crucial. Content is kind of the connective glue that um, shares your brand story, the value proposition. It shows your voice, your identity, the differentiation factors to choose you versus someone else. Those are critical. So I think companies need to be very clear on having a sense of that and wanting to convey that. So I think the types of content that does a couple of those things is, I think, simply like thought leadership content, specifically as it relates to biopharma, and educational content of how the product, or how the solution works for consumers, and really being thoughtful about the fears and anxieties and worries and challenges of the consumer. So I would say, along with thought leadership, patient stories are huge. Patient stories are, I guess, the testimonials of the value that your solution brings. So those tend to be very impactful from a content perspective. And as I was relating to video, I think that's you know those two content types, testimonies and patient stories, and illustrations of like what your product does, it's great on video because it breaks down that misunderstanding that a customer might have about who you are and what you provide, and it gives them a clear sense of your brand in so many sense. Not you could not only provide a visual, but you can provide an audio, and you can also have captions in the ad to bring your message. So it's multi-sensory communication that allows you to tell your story, and that's impactful. And I think also what we've seen really work is when senior stakeholders take a part of that. So brand
Yeah.
founders and brand CEOs, when they're actively engaged in communicating to their customers and their patients and their clients in a way that is one to it would be one to many for the brand, but it's one to one for that patient, it's one to one for that consumer. Hearing directly from leadership is such a really impactful way. So I think testimonies from clients and all, as well as people that work for your brand, it's huge.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference when you are trying to distinguish yourself, because there's so much content, and I think out there in the world in general, we all know this, but the ability to have someone at your brand talk about the brand, but also be that person to make that human connection, is really, I think,
Mhm.
what's going to define the brands from success. And I think that's still going to be a key differentiator in the market. Those brands that are
Yeah.
humanized and are willing to put people out and tell the stories.
Yeah, especially, we've talked here so much today about the audiences being the actual consumer of the product or service, but even though we're past the great resignation, I think in the healthcare and scientific sectors, there's certainly still a talent crisis, and that's not going to end anytime soon. So think about the value from a employee recruitment perspective of having those people speak about the brand, speak about culture, um, support the corporate branding and corporate reputation aspect of all of this. And ultimately, all of this comes down to, like I was saying earlier, it comes down to who are the audiences, what are their journeys, because that varies tremendously. If we're talking about a healthcare organization like a hospital or a healthcare system, obviously our primary focus is going to be patients and their caregivers. But over on the biopharma side, it's investors, it's HCPs, it's patients, it's partners, it's employment, it's a whole bunch of things. So ultimately, who you're trying to appeal to, what are their respective journeys, and then plug in the appropriate content themes that are going to resonate with those personas at different points of their journey. And I mean, hey, if you had unlimited resources, you could make videos for each of those personas at each of those respective points along their journey. I think very few, very few, if any, of our clients have unlimited resources. So you really do have to hone in on a particular audience usually. But again, define their
Yeah.
journeys, plug in the content themes, and
And
figure out what's going to resonate most.
yeah, and I think like the content piece of this is, like we're talking paid media, but you can leverage this. You could take your SEO content and leverage it in
Right.
paid media. Take your social media content, leverage it in paid media, vice versa.
Yep.
Like you can leverage your content in different ways, getting the most value out of what you've already produced. So it doesn't have to be daunting, and there's definitely cost savings available if you kind of plan your content strategy out correctly.
Right.
But there's so many opportunities to kind of take clips from longer pieces of content, longer form content pieces, and clip them up and create narratives through your ads for that audience segment. So there's a lot of things you can do with smaller budgets.
Yeah, and that's such a great point because we know here, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that our clients and us that we're always viewing stuff as that integrated effort that it should be. We know things are largely siloed and that oftentimes, probably more often than not, SEO is viewed as its own thing and is not fully integrated with paid, and social is separate from those. And what you just said is so key. Develop the content themes and the messages that are going to resonate with those audiences and their journeys, and make it cohesive. Use them across the multiple channels: paid, social, SEO, your website, email, podcasts, everything. And it really, I mean, we all could do a better job of fully integrating things. Changing
Yeah,
gears to the topic that is on everybody's mind and has been and will continue to be for a while. Let's talk a little bit about AI, artificial intelligence,
sure.
ChatGPT, the works. I know it's still relatively. I mean, AI is not early; it's been around for years. But this AI craze and the emergence of ChatGPT and so forth, and all the other tools, this is really only a few months old.
Yeah,
So I don't think anyone's expecting these tremendous insights and experience that you have leveraging all this stuff.
sure.
But anything you are seeing already and have seen, how do you see it currently impacting paid digital?
Yeah.
And, how do you foresee it reshaping the future of advertising?
Sure. So, interestingly, I think uh, all of the vendors for paid advertising have been a bit of the head of the game. So, if you think about Google, Google started implementing AI back in 2011. So, there's a long history of everyone from Facebook and Microsoft, which have all huge ad platforms. They've used AI to empower the targeting and the scaling of these systems. So I think it's always been with us. What we're seeing now
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the experience of everyone else kind of having these tools available for their workflows. And I think what it is doing is accelerating the pace and the expectations for what AI provides. So, today I think we just saw Google I/O Day where they're releasing new generative search experiences for on their website. We don't know what it's going to look like when it's finalized and when it's released out of beta, but there's it's definitely going to change, I think, user behavior. But what we're seeing is a lot of, companies using it internal for tools and trying to, I would say, marketers using them internally to kind of figure out ways to work faster and quicker, and do different tasks that might have taken a couple hours now it takes maybe a half hour or
Right.
15 minutes. So there's efficiency gains, which I think everyone should take advantage of. But I think as
Hmm.
it relates to brands consuming it, consumers or their patients that they're going after, what I'm seeing is early indications that this will be a shift in user behavior and a shift in user expectations that we don't really know what the fallout's going to be. There's new platforms now, and I would consider OpenAI a new platform. I consider
Hmm.
Bard and Perplexity and Bing Chat. All of these chat interfaces are what I will consider the early seeds of new platforms. And I think what
Hmm.
that's going to indicate is a change in, user behavior, which will be followed by different ad types and ad views. So there's a report that Bing will be providing ads for developers through their Bing Chat API. So they're already trying to monetize this, but I think that the challenge will be how do you monetize what is essentially a new user behavior? It will be a lot of testing and failing and figuring out how users are going to interact with ads within this format. But I think to succeed in this scenario, like actually the basics, the brilliant basics of understanding your consumers, understanding where they live, understanding where they are is going to be a big part of it. But also what this is enabling is hyper personalization, hyper segmentation. Again, it is being able to personalize copy at a much greater scale than you would have in the
Hmm.
past. I've talked about like we have 15 different variations running, but I don't see a reason why we couldn't have 100 different variations of
Right.
copy running,
Exactly.
or different video, hundreds of different variations of videos, because that's becoming more programmatic to do. So I think this very personalized experience where where I'm leveraging data to actually give me signals of what would work better with one consumer set than another, it's going to be key. And we're talking about audience personas and audience, segments, or at least
Yep.
I've been talking a lot about that. But I think they will become even more smaller. So we'll have
Hmm.
more of them, but they'll become much smaller till we get to the point where there's a one-to-one connection where I know this
Yeah.
person is very unique and that they like this, but they don't like this. I know I have different and peculiar tastes, and I have different, like I don't fit perfectly in one box. So like no
Right.
one does. So I think as more data is available to us, and as this automation um, is used more, we'll get to the point where every experience is personalized. And I don't think that's that far off. I think that in order to get to that point, we're already at the point where we're leveraging a ton of data to actually see what works and what doesn't. I just think it's going to be applied to many different facets.
Yeah, and think about the power of that. So one particular area that is hard for advertisers is rare disease. So think about
Yeah,
the power of when we do get to that almost one-to-one advertiser to consumer scenario, how appealing that's going to be for a drug company or a provider that's trying to reach people where there might only be 1,000 or 300 of them in the entire country or in the entire world.
yeah,
But we'll get there, and this is going to
yeah.
lend itself to.
And and what I will say, regarding specifically pharma companies, and there are obviously limitations as what we can do as far as we're marketing. There's a ton of limitations, and obviously we want to be HIPAA compliant and all of those things that are very key. I think when we think about what this means for the landscape moving forward, this is why understanding your own customers and data is really key. This is why having a clear sense of your first party data, if you're not directly selling to patients, and you could do remarketing. Like understanding that data is really key, but also just understanding these personas in a very enriched way where you can start leveraging these data sets within your targeting. You don't have to do remarketing, but like from the very first dollar spent, you want to have a clear understanding of who are the personas, who are these people you're going after. And the only way to get that is through a clear understanding of like what data you're getting from your website or whatever social channels that you're on. You want to make sure that you have a clear sense of that and you're segmenting that out the best way you can within the restrictions and requirements. But you want to make sure that you're in a good place with your data so that when you want to do programmatic or when you want to expand to different areas, that you know who you should be talking to and you know
Right.
where you should start going to meet your prospects.
Right. Right. I think the the general ways that I think we're envisioning AI benefit all of our marketing is, it's gonna help us know our target a lot better, okay, than we have in the past, because it just provides the ability to analyze a greater amount of data in better ways than we currently can. It's going to help us personalize to that user that we've defined better in better, more efficient ways than we've been able to. Um, it's going to help us analyze the results of what we're doing better and faster. And it's a force multiplier where, like you alluded to, and we've talked about this, you might be able to test 25 pieces of ad copy without the client having to pay for that additional time necessarily that it would have taken us to write 25 pieces of ad copy, where in the past we might only be testing 5 or something. And so we're, I think a lot of agencies, a lot of marketers are struggling with, is this going to replace me and diminish our value? I think most of us believe it's not going to replace us, but it is a force multiplier. It's going to allow us to do things at more scale than we've been able to. And then there's a whole other aspect of this, which is just use of chatbots. For instance, and this is speculation, I'm not claiming that we've done this or we're doing this, but think about when we drive someone to a landing page, will having a chat bot on that landing page for the user better engage them, that could drive a conversion more effectively? I mean, those are things that we're looking at. How a chat bot can improve engagement and improve conversion as well. And that'll lend itself obviously to paid as well. So again, this is all
Yeah.
new. We don't have all these
Yeah.
answers and any proof of this, but
Yeah,
we'll
and
see.
I think it's super exciting. I think what's happening is that we're becoming the web, or in general digital, is becoming more multimodal. So there's so many different ways we can interact with things now, and I think that's just gonna, like, we've just started to see the interactions that we can have with text to video or video to audio. Like, I think the ways that we're consuming information and will digest or ingest that information is changing so quickly, and the opportunities are huge right now, so that when we think about media, that's going to just follow that path. So the restrictions that we currently have on how we can engage with our customers, I think that will change. I think
Right.
you can have personal conversations with them in ways that are engaging and that provides value for them, but also kind of help you understand your business better. So there's so many opportunities, I think, that we haven't scratched the surface, and it's exciting to kind of be here for this shift.
Exactly. With regulatory being, our biggest obstacle, as it is with everything when it comes to the industries that we work in, but we'll see, and we'll all navigate that together.
Yeah.
Well, Phill, this has been just a tremendous amount of information. There's just so much about this topic. I think we're gonna probably be talking a lot in the future on our podcast with you on future episodes. But this was great, and I appreciate
Yeah.
all your insights. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been enjoyable. So really happy
Yeah,
to
it's
be
been a
doing it.
pleasure. All right, thanks, Phill.
Yeah. Thank you.